Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel, and today I'm going to be giving you a tour of my winter garden. Apologies if there's any noise right now. There's construction going on the lot next to mine, but today I'm going to show you around my garden. This is certainly nowhere near finished. I've got so much work that I'm going to be doing in the spring to slowly transform this space into a great place for native wildlife and pollinators, and also for veggies and fruits for myself and my family. So I'm gonna go ahead and show you around the garden, so let's get started. All right, so a lot has changed in this space behind me. This is gonna be my veggie garden growing area. So I actually used to have a little kid shed, I guess it's like a little kid playhouse that was sitting on my property when I bought it, and I tore that down because I don't have kids. I could use that space for growing. So I took the wood that was on there and I repurposed it and made raised garden beds, and I lined the wood with landscape fabric to hopefully prevent some of the paint or anything really bleeding through. And then the back, the other ones, they're really in-ground beds. They have like 3 inches, 4 inches of raised soil, but really, you know, the roots are going right down into that native soil that I have on my property. And one thing I'm actually going to be doing with these beds before I plant in them is I'm going to be getting a soil test done for nutrients, pH, and heavy metals. Something that I did this year was I collected a bunch of leaves on my street, and I actually top dressed the beds with leaves to protect the soil over the winter. And I also added underneath the leaves some compost, which I'll let sit through the winter. Hopefully the worms will, you know, distribute that throughout the garden beds, and I'm hoping for some nice soil this year. A lot of the work I did this year was trying to incorporate as many principles of the no-dig method as possible, as well as the lasagna method for building soil. So that's layering compost, and there's some brush, and there's some cardboard and leaves, and creating a bunch of layers of that at the bottom of my raised beds to help build the soil slowly. If you're wondering what I have on this stake here, this post was already here when I moved in, and I didn't really want to take it out, so I put a little rain gauge here, so I'll be able to track during our dry summers how much rain we're getting, if any. It's winter right now, so I actually just dumped this, but it was overflowing because we've been getting a ton of rain here on Vancouver Island. All right, so arguably the most exciting part of my tour, at least for me, is my native plant garden. And this area has also been probably the hardest work I've put in any section of my garden. It's been a tremendous amount of work restoring the soil in this area, removing landscape fabric, and slowly trying to remediate the area and create conditions that are good for growing native plants. A lot of the plants that are already kind of established now are native plants that are more tolerant of disturbance. I'm really hoping to make this area in the next few years a really beautiful native plant pollinator meadow. It's really a challenging project, but it's really fulfilling, and I'm excited to see how this starts looking in the next few years. So this is a project that I did this year. This is kind of a bit of a rain garden inspired area. It doesn't look that nice right now, but this is actually one of the lower spots in the garden bed. So all the water drains into here and it creates standing water for a little bit, and then it kind of absorbs into the soil. So I'll show you some of the shrubs that I decided to plant along this wall. So I want this wall to be a little bit more grown up because this is my neighbor's property, and I want some privacy here. So what I've planted is Pacific Wax Myrtle, which is native to the West Coast. And I also have another Pacific Wax Myrtle over there. I also have planted California Lilac, which is a ceanothus species that is supposed to get up to 9 feet tall. So we'll see how that works out. And back there I have a twinberry. It's deciduous, and so it doesn't have any leaves right now, so it's not that exciting, but twinberry bush back there. And so this is the Pacific Wax Myrtle. This is kind of what the California Lilac looks like when it gets a little bigger, and it grows these really beautiful flowers that the pollinators love. So this will definitely contribute to the pollinator zone. Back here, this is a really wet area that completely floods basically through the winter. So I decided to plant self-heal, which is part of the mint species. So it might actually get quite bushy in this area. So I don't know if that yet is a mistake or not, but I really wanted this area to fill out so that it doesn't just start growing weeds and invasives here. And the self-heal, also pollinators love it, and it is, as the name implies, a really powerful medicinal plant. So I don't mind having a lot of it, so we'll see how that goes. And then moving this way, this area has been seeded, so you can see all the little seedlings. Some of these are weed seedlings, which I'll have to pick out once I know my seedlings I purposely planted and what they look like. But I've seeded it with goldenrod, I've seeded it with a drought tolerant native meadow mix, and I've also seeded it with coastal mugwort. Shout out to Satin Flower Nurseries in Saanich, who provided all of those, except for the goldenrod seeds. Those came from Machosen Seeds. I've got more of the California lilac here, and then this part of the native plant area is a little all over the place, but I have the goldenrod here, which has been really fun to plant. Right now it's going to seed, so seeds are going everywhere. So I have some more goldenrod as well back there. Over here, this is more areas that I've seeded. So the deer ate this, but this was a Pearly Everlasting. You can still see some of the really pretty little flower heads here. So hopefully this will still seed itself and come back next year now that I've got the deer out, hopefully. Right here, this beautiful plant is Yarrow. So this one, you can see how beautiful and how much of a pollinator attractant it is. You can also see how much it's already starting to go crazy, so I wouldn't be surprised if this starts to fill out a ton of this area and start to compete with other plants. But the goldenrod's also a pretty quick spreading species, so I think this will be quite full soon. Back here I have a snowberry that I have in the deer cage, and more Pearly Everlasting. And then let's move over here. This is where I have planted coastal mugwort. So this is also a medicinal plant, native plant. So hopefully I'll have a lot of coastal mugwort in the years to come. I planted some camas bulbs here, so that's what that stick indicates, is to make sure I'm looking for the camas coming up. And here is a California aster. So beautiful flowers, so I'm excited for this one as well. Moving over here, this is a June plum that my boss gave me, and the deer ate it down to the nub, so I don't know if it's going to survive, but we'll see what happens there. Then more California lilac, and this is like my meditation stump is what I've been calling it, but it's just in a private part in the back of my property. I've just been sitting here and reading. So this area behind me is my area that's under my cedars, and this is a really dark and shaded area. So the idea I have here is doing native plants that naturally will grow under cedars. So right now I have a salal planted, I think that's how you pronounce it, and I'm also have a few western sword ferns planted, but I want to make this area a lot more dense than it is now, so I'm hoping that the salal will fill it out nicely and get nice and bushy within a few years. I also planted a few berries. I planted thimbleberry and salmonberry. Those are native berries, and I'm not quite sure if they're going to survive because I think they need a bit more water than what they're getting here, and this is in the very back of my property, and I don't have really the time to water back here, so those might die, but hopefully one of those species will do well and fill out this area back here. All right, this area back here is my Gary Oak Meadow. I say that in quotes because Gary Oak Meadows are a local endangered ecosystem, to say it simply. In the area I live, Vancouver Island, before houses were built here and development happened and colonization, there were Gary Oak Meadows that was basically the ecosystem that would have been here before my house was here. So I am going to start to restore some of my land to more mimic a Gary Oak ecosystem, which I will never be able to do within my lifetime because that was a sensitive ecosystem that has already been damaged, that was built up over so many years that unfortunately I'm never going to be able to completely mimic it, especially in this isolated small area. But I thought it'd be kind of fun to just do something to replicate maybe a little bit of what it would look like before. So I have two Gary Oak trees which form kind of the basis of the ecosystem and where the name comes from, and then underneath the Gary Oaks traditionally it would be like a meadow, so meadow species, grasses, herbs, flowers. So right now I'm actually sheet mulching it like as per like a no dig method to restore the soil, because this was just grass around the trees before. So I haven't really planted much in the soil yet. Hopefully next year I can work on that a bit more, but I did plant some camas bulbs, Great Camas, which is a native flower that is a pretty stereotypical flower of a Gary Oak ecosystem. So those are really special flowers, so I really hope they'll do well here. And traditionally First Nations people in the area forage for camas bulbs, so it has a lot of meaning to grow camas flowers in this area. I also have some aster. I think it's Douglas aster, but I'm not positive, and that was already there actually from the previous owner, so that kind of works perfectly with my meadow idea. And then eventually I want to do some native grasses and maybe even make a little area where birds can nest, like ground nesting birds in here without being disturbed. So this area has a lot of work to go, but I have big plans to also expand it out, probably a lot more than it is now, but I wanted to practice with a small space before I do the larger space. So this is an extra special and exciting part of my garden, and this is the new compost area that I set up this year. And I've become obsessed with composting. And in my first garden video that I made, I used to put my lawn clippings and stuff like that in municipal compost. But now that I have my compost bin set up, things are going great. I also have a bunch of leaves that I collected this year. I collected them from my neighbors and from all over the town, basically. And I'm using them as mulch and also in my compost. And then the way that I have my compost set up is it's a 2-bin system that I created using pallets. I looked at all the stamps, and there's no sorts of contamination from these pallets. I know the source, and I asked if I can use them, which is an awesome kind of resource that I have for free. And I'm doing a 2-bin system where one of my bins I'm not adding to it and just letting it finish so that I could top dress my beds in the spring. And the other bin is kind of the active compost that I'm still adding to, like from my food scraps. It's been really exciting and fun to learn about compost. I don't know if you guys remember in my first tour I showed you the part of the yard that was already a native plant garden. So it's a native plant shade garden, kind of like rainforesty, kind of thickets of snowberry and Nootka rose. I think it's Nootka rose. Some sword ferns, kind of a little moist, shady area. I actually haven't done that much with it this year. I've only added a few species to this area because it already was doing so well. So this was pretty untouched since last time I showed you guys my garden. So I have been doing some reading about how to best support insects over the winter, and one of the things that I read was not to clean up your garden too much. And so I've definitely cleaned up, whatever that means. It's dirt. I've cleaned up things a bit and pruned things a bit for the winter. So I wanted to keep an area where things were pretty messy. So this area in the back corner, I let the grass grow quite like wild. So hopefully if there's any insects that want to overwinter that are too disturbed to do it in other areas, I don't know, they can have this long grass area. You know, eventually this niche, I guess, is going to be filled by my native plant garden once I get native grasses in, but right now that's not the case yet, so I'm letting this area go a little wild. So one of the most exciting things exciting for me that I've started this year is I'm going to be doing a fruit orchard. And so this is inspired a little bit by some of the videos I've been watching about food forests and permaculture and some of the ideas behind planting more trees in your yard that are going to feed you, create nice shade and nice habitat in your yard. So I decided to start an orchard where I'm going to be slowly kind of trying to incorporate some of those like food forest principles slowly, because I want to make sure I do this right. So I started by planting an apple tree, which is this tree behind me, is a semi-dwarf Gravenstein apple. And then I also have some crab apple, and all my neighbors have apples, so hopefully, you know, I shouldn't have to worry about another pollinator for that one. And then I also have a fig tree. I live in zone 9A, which is southern Vancouver Island, so we can grow figs pretty easily here. We usually don't get the second crop from what I've heard, but you get the first harvest. So hopefully my fig tree will do well. I have them planted in full sun. And some more fruit trees I want to add this year. I want to add a pear tree, cherry tree, and I might do a peach tree, but I haven't decided yet. I have plenty of space for them. It's really exciting for me to kind of get the orchard going. You know, eventually I have a lot of grass in this area. Eventually I want to kind of convert that to something else, more in like the food forest kind of style. But I have to win over my partner on that, getting rid of all the lawn. And I also have to make sure I do it right. I do want to keep a section of the lawn though, probably back behind this apple tree, and I want to do a like dinner garden area. And so I have this idea of putting a picnic table in my backyard and then kind of tucking it between like the trees of the orchard and then hanging like solar string lights around it so that we can actually have dinner in the garden in the summer. Let me know if you have any suggestions for fruit trees, you know, that is southern Vancouver Island I could grow. So this area behind me is my ornamental garden. So I realized I had to kind of decide what I was going to do about buying non-native ornamental plants and native plants, and still wanted a place to have some ornamental plants that were non-native just for fun or for beauty or for pollinators or whatever. So I decided to designate them all into this garden bed. So, you know, if I have a non-native plant or I have one gifted to me, it usually just goes back here. That also is going to be the case for a lot of the flower bulbs that I have that I just dig up around the property. You know, there's nothing wrong with like tulips and, you know, daisies and some of the plants that the previous owner planted. I just don't really want them in like my native plant garden as they're not native. So I've been repurposing them to include in my ornamental garden. So most of the species here were already purchased by and planted by the previous owner, and I don't want to tear them out just because they're not native. So I kind of keep them relegated to this section of the garden. Forgot to mention this guy too. I also planted this year. This is a Arnold Promise variety of witch hazel, which I intend to hopefully learn the medicinal uses for witch hazel and how to harvest from that. And I also think it's kind of exciting to have a tree that blooms in the winter, kind of providing some flowers and winter interest, I guess. So this is kind of cool. It's almost December in Vancouver Island and I still have a rose. In this ornamental garden I also planted gardenias, which is my favorite kind of non-native flower. So my gardenia bush is just really loving it here. It is like tripled in size since I bought it, even through the winter. It's so beautiful and lush. Excuse the mess a bit, but this is how my patio garden is looking. Obviously this is going to look a lot nicer in the summer as it is winter season, but I have some of my more heat-loving succulents tucked away in here for the season because I don't want them to get too rained on. And then this is kind of funny. I let my cilantro and dill go to seed and they are really coming up. We got chives back here as well, and a volunteer tomato, which actually has been kind of producing a few tomatoes even through the winter, which is strange. But you can see my cilantro and my dill just like going crazy. So back here I have a few containers that aren't doing too much. This cedar planter, which if you guys saw my patio tour back when I lived in an apartment, I used to garden in this on my patio, but I have planted garlic in here, so it hasn't sprouted yet. So I didn't plant it that long ago, so hopefully garlic will be growing in here. I was able to plant around 20 cloves, I think, somewhere around there. And then back here is just going to be herbs for next year. This is already some of the herbs that I just already had. This is lemon verbena, lemon thyme, and Greek oregano. There's nothing in here. This is all just dead. So I have been working on my garden for the last year now, and it's been really tough because I realized over the last, you know, it hasn't quite been a year, it's been a few seasons. Over the last few seasons, there are a lot of challenges with this lot, specifically around some of my soil. So I've been doing a lot of kind of soil restoration. One of the big issues that I ran into with my soil was that there was plastic landscape fabric throughout my property. The previous owner had laid down. Unfortunately, one of the downsides of it too is that there was this few top inches of kind of organic matter on top of the landscape fabric from the mulch breaking down, and then underneath the plastic fabric was just hard soil that had no organic material or no give to it. It just like, it felt like rock. It was so hard. You know, now a lot of the area is starting to get a lot better. One of my biggest goals with this garden is to rewild the landscape as much as possible, and that's saying that word is probably pretty loaded. Like, a lot of people might anticipate my entire yard is just going to be all 100% native pollinator plants and not a speck of anything else, which isn't going to be the case, because one of the things I'm trying to do is balance my needs with needs of the environment, and also thinking about restoring it to the landscape that came before when my house was here. So it's a lot of work, but it's very, very much worth it. So I have been trying to balance my vegetable gardens and my herbal gardens for herbal medicine and for teas. So some of those do contain non-natives, because I'm planting tomatoes and lettuce and some of those kind of traditional plants that I need to reduce my own carbon footprint and prevent myself from going to the grocery store as much. But also I'm trying to fill all the areas I'm not using for vegetable gardening with native plants, or kind of this alternative option that blends both is the food forest idea. And I'm not an expert in this, but I'm really like the idea of turning my space into a edible landscape where, you know, birds and pollinators can move throughout, and you know, it supports habitat, but also I can eat all the things in it, or close to all the things. So I'm trying to kind of combine those things, but you know, I still got my raised beds and my little in-ground garden that's not in that traditional food forest format for now, but I'm going to start experimenting with my orchard area to bring in some of those principles. I'm a beginner gardener, so I'm sure I'm making mistakes. I'm always making mistakes. So let me know in the comment section down below what you think, if you have any suggestions for this space, if you've thought about doing something similar in your space. So thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.